Each of us knows the ache of waiting for change. Each of us knows the ache of waiting for change. For some of us, that looks like a sickness that you've been praying about and hoping for that has yet to be healed. For others of us, it's a prodigal son or daughter who has walked away from the faith and they still have yet to return. For others of us, it's a job offer that we're hoping one day comes through. For a lot of us, it's waiting for this pandemic to be over, right? The conversation that we've been having is wanting to go back to normal, right? And there's this longing for returning to normalcy. If you've been anything like me, you watch movies now and you see like a herd of people gathered without masks, and you're like, it's a strange thing. It's like the former days of old, you know? For a lot of us too, it's waiting for this broken partisan politics nonsense to be fixed. You know, it's this clashing and fighting, and you know, if you turn on the news for any amount of time, it's like there's no good news. There's just pure chaos. And for us, there's this longing of just wanting something to change, to be different. And to be honest, it can be frustrating, this aching and waiting for change. And a lot of these times and moments where we have these in our relationship with God, we get frustrated with Him. How long, Lord? How long till you just change things? Till you make it right? Till you make things new? We look at the state of our world and we know it is deeply broken. And we long for change. We see suffering and injustice all throughout our world. And it begs the question, God, where are you? What are you doing? Where are you at? For a lot of people, this question is a stumbling block in their faith. They wrestle within themselves and with God when they look at the state of the world and think, where is God in all of this? As followers of Jesus, we have something that sets us apart from the rest of the world. As many others look at the landscape of our society and trust in better politics, better programming, education, whatever the hope structure would be, they are constantly let down. But for followers of Jesus, our eyes are not set on that which is just before our eyes, but on that which awaits on the horizon. And it is the coming of the King. If you are in this moment of aching and waiting for change, I want you to know two things this morning. One, God is with you. And two, God is working through you. God is with you, and God is working through you. As a church, we've been in this series, Exiles and Empires, and I've just been really humbled at how perfectly timed the Spirit of God does things like this. How perfectly He is orchestrating each of the messages here to what is happening in our cultural moment. And I'm constantly just humbled at how the Spirit just aligns the message to the church that He's proclaiming here and now. And I think today is no different. You see, we have been examining the life of Daniel. Daniel being an Israelite who was taken as a prisoner of war and exiled into this place underneath the empire of Babylon. And it is there where he's constantly faced trial and struggle and resistance. And time after time, he's seen God's faithfulness. God show up when his back was against the wall. And we've seen that happen story over story of God delivering him and his friends from the hands of the oppressor and reminding them, Daniel and his friends, and their oppressors, that though they are in exile, God is with them. Here in Daniel chapter 7, we hit a turning point in the book. Bible scholars say of this moment, it is the center of gravity of the book of Daniel. Now, I want to do a little bit of a warning. This chapter is weird, right? Okay, I just want to be honest with you. And it's important. It's just weird. There's just some weird things happening here. We're going to walk all of this through together. But just wanted to warn you, if you were just looking for some quick, practical, like fortune cookie wisdom nuggets, that's not going to happen in this sermon. We're going to have to do a lot of deconstructing of some crazy visions, okay? But we have a lot of groundwork to cover today, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to read through the entire passage, and I'll kind of make quick pick stops just to like bring some clarity or add a point, or thing like that. And then we'll kind of comb back through, and I'll highlight some key moments. And at the very end, we'll talk about what on earth this book has to do for us today in Los Lunas in 2020 where we live. You guys ready? You buckled up? You had your coffee yet? Did you stretch? Did you get going? Here we go. Daniel chapter 7. Starting in verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. So one, if you've been paying attention, automatically a little red flag has popped up in your mind. You see, as we've been going through the story chronologically, Belshazzar is already dead. Right? He's already been killed by the Medo-Persian Empire. So what's happening here is the author is drawing back on a vision that Daniel's had. The second thing is all the time Daniel's been in Babylon, he's been interpreting the dreams of other kings, right? He's been interpreting dreams that have been happening. And suddenly, Daniel himself here gets a vision. And this is really the crux of the book here, where the book kind of really turns. It's been stories about God's faithfulness. And for the next half of the book, it's all about weird, crazy visions that Daniel gets and has to interpret and figure out what this means for him and his cultural moment. And so Daniel is there having a dream, and then as he comes back to it, he writes down the substance, everything that's happened in the dream. Verse 2. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was the four winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. And four beasts of each different from the others came out of the sea." So, as I said this a bunch of times, the Bible is full of Easter eggs. Okay, and so there's deliberate choice of language here that the scripture authors are using. So this vision of these chaotic waters, so this vision of four winds, and this means just winds from every direction, it's kind of stirring up the water, so the waters are chaotic. If you are a Bible nerd, I don't know, have you guys ever seen the Marvel movies, and you've seen the Marvel movies with somebody who knows Marvel really well? They're like, that right there is Captain America's shield from the 1932 comic book. And you're like, oh my gosh, right? If you're a Bible scholar, if you're a Bible nerd, you hear chaotic waters and all these things start popping in your mind, right? And so when you think of chaotic waters, it should draw your mind back to Genesis. You see, when everything was created in the beginning, it was the chaotic waters that God stilled and separated and brought order to. So where there was chaos and destruction, God brought order to. The second thing of that is, if you're familiar with the Bible stories, right, you remember Noah and how the earth was flooded. That imagery of the earth being flooded is God releasing his authority and control over the waters, and the chaotic waters consume the earth. It says in Colossians that in Jesus, he holds all things together. That by God, all things are held. But this image of chaotic waters is a space where God is not ruling and reigning over that, and destruction is ensuing. And so Daniel gets this vision of, and he would know this, Daniel's steeped in the scriptures. So he sees these chaotic waters, and out of these chaotic waters, out of these rebellious waters, four beasts crawl out. Which this is a nightmare, right? So he sees these four beasts, and each of them are different. Verse 4, the first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and a mind of a human was given to it. And there before me stood a second beast, which was like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." After that I looked, and there was another beast, one that was like a leopard, and on its back was 4 wings, and like that of a bird. And the beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. And after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims, and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. It goes on, right? Wow, I was thinking about the horns. There before me was another horn, a little one, which came among them, and the 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. Thank you for coming to church today. I hope this does you well. God bless you. It's weird, right? If anyone reads that and tried to be like super spiritual and it's like, oh man, that's just so good. I'm going to put that on a coffee mug. The little horn had eyes like a human and mouth that spoke boastfully. I'm going to put that on my pillow and just, it'll be a little throw item. No, it's weird, right? Now, here's one thing I need you to know. Daniel's not experiencing this dream and not thinking that it's weird. Daniel's just as spooked and creeped as you are. Now, if you ever having a low day, you just need a good laugh, I want you to Google artist renditions of these images. They're hilarious. Now, I know the artists are doing the best that they can, but my gosh, I was rolling yesterday looking at some of the images where people try to put human faces on a horn. It was hilarious. But let's talk about a little bit of these beasts briefly. So the first one is this lion. And the lion has these wings, and all of a sudden the wings are ripped off, and this lion is given the mind of a human, right? And that's kind of his transformation. The next one is this bear, and this bear just finished having lunch. He's got the ribs of an animal in his teeth, and you hear a voice saying like, keep on eating, right? And then there's another one, it's a leopard, and a four-headed leopard. Now, tigers and leopards, and those, they're scary already, right? Now, a four-headed one that has wings, okay? Think about how terrifying that would be, that a leopard is not only fast on the ground, but if somehow you got to high grounds and think you're safe, he starts flying, right? This is terrifying vision, frightening to your core, right? So Daniel's experiencing this, and what on earth is going on? And then there's another beast, what we're going to call the super beast, right? And this thing, he can't even put categories to. It's just a beast. And it's got these 10 horns, and out of it comes a small horn that speaks. It has like a face of a human, and it speaks, and it's speaking boastfully. It's bragging. It's bragging about its own power and authority. What on earth is going on, right? Watch what happens next. Verse 9, and as I looked, thrones were set in place. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair on his head was white as wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were ablaze. And a river of fire was flowing, coming out before him, and thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. So suddenly this takes a change. He sees these four beasts crawl out, and this super mega beast, right, is speaking like boastfully against God, and all of a sudden the Ancient of Days, right, which is this term used for God. Now, there's a weird misconception about God where people think about God as like an old man with gray hair and a gray beard, right? And this is kind of where that comes from. That's kind of a misunderstanding of the attributes that the scripture authors are doing. Ancient of Days doesn't mean old, right? It means eternal. It means existing forever. So I don't want you to think about God and think about this old man with white hair. That's not the framework of the biblical authors. This is simply the Ancient of Days just means the eternal one. Right? And you're all, well, what about the white hair and the white clothes? This is not a symbol of age, it's a symbol of purity. That he is whole, he is pure, he is holy. And this is the image that he gets. And the next, he describes this kind of chariot of sorts, which if you're a Bible scholar, you're automatically thinking about Ezekiel and Ezekiel's vision of the chariot of God. And after that, he notices that the Ancient of Days, that God the Father is surrounded by thousands upon thousands of spiritual beings around him. There's this council around God. But then he notices something, that this isn't just like a worship service or hanging out, but he's in a courtroom. Because he realizes the court is beginning and the books are being opened. This is this moment of judgment. Watch what happens next. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. So this little horn on the beast that is there is speaking blasphemy against God. It is being proud and raging against him. And then it says, I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into a blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. So this Ancient of Days has these beasts in front of him, and suddenly the beasts are judged, and they're destroyed, and they're ruined. And then suddenly he sees a Son of Man. Now this literally just means the human one. Son of Man literally just means a human one. But there's something special about this human one, and that he's coming on the clouds. Now, if you've been around church for any amount of time, this language is familiar to you of coming on the clouds. We sing songs about it, right? And there's even that famous passage in 1 Thessalonians where Paul talks about him coming on the clouds. But here's the greatest misconception about this passage. Where are we when all this is happening? Are we on earth? No. This is a vision that he's having of a heavenly throne room where God is bringing judgment onto these beasts. And the Son of Man is coming on the clouds. So is he coming from heaven to earth, or is he going from earth to heaven? Earth to heaven. He's ascending into the throne room. So the coming on the clouds is not down, but actually up. It is his exaltation. It is his ascension. And this human one is coming up on the clouds. Now, if you are a Bible scholar, again, the flags are going off in your mind, because clouds is this imagery of divine power and the presence of God. Think about Mount Sinai, when the Ten Commandments are. The Mount Sinai was covered in a cloud. It was God's presence. As the children of Israel were wandering in the desert, they were led by a cloud. When the temple is dedicated, the temple was filled with a cloud. It is this imagery of God's presence and divine power. So this human one is not just human. He has divine power, the presence of God. He is a God human. Bible trivia. Can you think of anyone who we know of that is both God and human? It is the right answer in children's church 96% of the time. Jesus, right? Yes, you're doing it, right? So, Jesus, this human one, is brought to the throne room, and he's given authority, he's given a throne, he's given glory, and every being worships him. Every being in heaven and on earth worships him. And it says his kingdom, the one who's seated on this throne, is a dominion that will not fade or go away. What on earth does this mean? Daniel's asking the same exact question. Watch what happens next. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me, right? I approached one of those standing there and asked them the meaning of all this. So Daniel's feeling very similar to you right now. What the heck, right? Like, what on earth is happening here? And so much so that he's like seeing all of this take place, and there's all of these angels, and Daniel like scoots over to one. He's like, psst, what the heck is going on here? You know, he's baffled. And watch what the angelic being explains to him. He says this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast was crushed and the beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also want to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up before the 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others and had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come after this kingdom, and after them another king will arise, different from the other ones, and he will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit and his power will be taken away completely and destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness, for all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, and I kept the matter to myself. And that's the end of the vision. Trippy, right? There's so much happening here. So let's walk through some of that briefly. So we know that these four beasts are images of kings and kingdoms. And we'll kind of tease out those here in a little bit. But we know that there are these kings and kingdoms. And there's one, this super beast, that is the most destructive, that is the most volatile, that is the most anti-God. And he comes to destroy. But God intervenes, stops the beast, and gives all authority, glory, and power to these holy people that they continue to bring up. That there are all these kings who come into power, that they're represented as these beasts. God stops the beasts and exalts his people. It is a pattern through these three beasts and even that super beast, right? And then God takes away all of their authority, all of their power. It's all handed over, and this is the interpretation of the vision. So this begs the question, what on earth is going on? And how do we apply this to our lives? Like, what are we as followers of Jesus in Los Lunas in 2020, almost 2021, going to do with this crazy vision? Do we stay on the lookout for like a lion who's got wings ripped off? Like, how do we navigate this? So the first thing I want to talk about is this. This here is a vision and a dream for a tired heart. I want you to put yourself in Daniel's shoes. Daniel has seen kings rise and kings fall. Remember that when he went into exile, his understanding and his theology was, I'm going to be here, I'm going to serve God faithfully, I'm going to resist the ways of Babylon. Do you think this is easy for him? Over the last several weeks, we've been talking about how our own Babylon, America, has influenced us. How we, at times, are unfaithful to Jesus and more faithful to the American dream, right, because of our own shallow hearts. And so we can get weary. Have you been there? Have you been trying so hard to follow Jesus, and it feels like the world is this constant tide, wave after wave after wave after wave that never relents, that never gives up, that never stops? It gets exhausting. It gets tiring. It's this ache of exile. We feel it, and Daniel feels it. It's how long? Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Cyrus, how long? How many of these guys am I going to have to deal with? And we feel the same way. How many more things? How much more time? Lord, how long until you make things right? How long must we wait for change? And this is the ache of exile. It's longing for the kingdom that's to come. It's this desire that you have inside of you to never find real contentment here, but it's this longing for the kingdom of God that's going to come. This ache of being in between, this ache of waiting for deliverance, this ache of awaiting the arrival of the king. This is what Daniel's experiencing. And so God meets him with this vision as a way of reminding him about the larger story that he is in and the way that which God works in the world. God speaks clearly to Daniel by giving him a peek behind the curtain to what God is going to do with injustice, with evil, with corrupt kingdoms, and how he's going to handle it. The second thing I want to point out is this common imagery of when kingdoms become beasts. When kingdoms become beasts. Again, a ton of Easter eggs here, but this is what should be in your mind as you're going through this passage. So first, I want to take us back to Genesis. In the Garden of Eden, right, Adam and Eve are having and enjoying life with God, but suddenly a beast shows up, a serpent, a snake. Shows himself, this beast from somewhere else. And he persuades Adam and Eve into the promise of evil, that is which they can be gods if they want to. They determine what is good and what is evil. They no longer have to live underneath the rule and reign of Yahweh. They determine for themselves good and evil. And this beast pulls them away from life with God. Shortly after that story is the famous story of Cain and what? Abel. Cain is jealous of his brother Abel because God has accepted his sacrifice and rejected his. And God comes with a stern warning for Cain. Do you remember his warning? He says, you need to be mindful of this feeling that you have, this sin that is waiting for you. Because he says, sin is crouching at your door. And its desire is to overcome you. He says, but you have a choice. You can either be overcome by the beast or you can resist it. What happens to Cain? He's overcome by the beast and he kills his brother. From that starts a line of destructive human relationships that lead us to the Tower of what? Babel, which is also another name for Babylon. Where is Daniel now? Babylon, right? This whole story is all weaving together to tell a larger story. But Babylon is a symbol of a kingdom that is in rebellion against him. Another way to say this, it is a kingdom that lives for the beast, that is sin, that is corruption, that is rebellion against God. Now, in Daniel, there's a story about a king, a ruler, one who has authority, who ends up acting like a beast. Does that sound familiar? Daniel chapter 4. Do you remember the story of Nebuchadnezzar that we had talked about? That he is a king and he is proud, and God comes to him and says, if you do not humble yourself, you will be overcome like a what? Beast. And what happens? Exactly that. Nebuchadnezzar becomes a beast, and it is there where God humbles Nebuchadnezzar and he regains his humanity. The common motif of the scriptures is that when humans become overcome by sin, we can't become like beasts. Now think about it. You've all seen National Geographic, Animal Planet. Does anyone have to tell a mountain lion to eat? No. Do you think the mountain lion ever feels remorse about getting the baby gazelle? Do you think he's just like, I did it again. I said I would never do that. Absolutely not. Right? No one has to tell the mountain lion to do anything. He just does, right? You're hiking in the Manzanos and there are sandias, and you see a mountain lion, right? And he's in the stance, you know you're about to go. How well do you think you're going to reason him out of doing this? You're like, all right, dude, I'm not going to lie to you. I eat nothing but Hostess cakes and Little Debbie's. I'm not going to taste good. I promise you. I'm not lean. It's all fat. It'll be really chewy. Please don't do it. You're not going to reason him out of that. You're not like, dude, right now, me and you, I'll take you to a steakhouse, right? I'll get you a nice cut of meat, bro, cooked perfectly, sauteed in butter. You're not going to convince him of anything. Why? He's just going to act primally, and bye-bye. There you go. Your only hope is you outrun him, you juke him, you do something crazy, right? And you somehow overcome him. That's your only hope. Animals instinctively act on desire. What separates us human beings from these beastly creatures is our power to have control over our desires. We know that we can't just do any desire that comes into our being, because we know not all desires are good. But when human beings become overcome by sin, they become beings driven by their own desires. And we become like animals without control. We do what we must do because of our desires. This is the message of the scriptures about sin and its beastly nature. Now, the biblical authors love using this imagery to talk about kings and kingdoms because it's that imagery that ties all together. And there's dozens of examples in the scriptures. Read Isaiah, read Ezekiel, read Jeremiah, and how they speak of these kings who are these animal-like tendencies. They're like a lion, they're like a bear. There's these beastly things that have no control or no paradigm for stopping themselves. This is a common motif in the scriptures. Now, let's talk about the cast of characters, who we all have happening in the story. The first piece I want to talk about is the lion. Now, most Bible scholars believe that this lion is a representation of the Babylonian Empire, specifically because of this. Draw back to that story in Daniel chapter 4 of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is like a beast, but what happens? He's had his mind restored to him. He becomes a human again because a human mind is restored to him. He's humbled himself. So this king who was once a beast becomes then a human. And they believe that this is the correlation between the lion and Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, right? And then shortly after Nebuchadnezzar's death, Belshazzar takes over, and then the kingdom is turned over to the Medo-Persians, which leads us to the second one, which is this bear. Now it says this bear has 3 ribs in its mouth, and this is supposed to be a representation of the Medo-Persian Empire. And he has ribs in his mouth, but he's still hungry, right? We've all been there, eating somewhere and you're done and you're looking for more, right? That's this bear. It's this imagery of never being satisfied. You will know this all soon at Thanksgiving, right? When you've had one serving and you're like, it's once a year, And so someone's going to say to you, rise, eat to your fill, right? But it's this imagery of someone who has this thirst for violence, for evil that is never satisfied. And that's how the prophetic critique of that Persian Empire is. And the next one is the leopard. Now, notice a couple important things about the leopard. One, it has 4 heads. And this is believed to be the Greek Empire, otherwise known as spearheaded by Alexander the Great. In history, no one believes that any other kingdom or empire rose as fast as the Greek Empire did. And after Alexander the Great passes away, he doesn't have kids to give it to, so the kingdom is divided into 4 kingdoms, 4 lesser kings who come and who rule over. So the wings are supposed to be a representation of how fast it spreads, right? A leopard with also the ability to fly, and 4 heads being the divided kingdom. So those are those 3 that most Bible scholars believe. Now, where a lot of contention happens is with this super beast, with this beast with all the horns and all this craziness about it. Some Bible scholars believe that this is about Antiochus IV, which the next kingdom that comes into power is the Syrian Empire. And Antiochus IV was one of great evil and great wickedness and was in great violence towards the Israelites. So much so that he overtakes Jerusalem and he sacrifices pigs on the altar there. He cancels all of their festivals and all their holidays. They're no longer to do that. He hires out the high priest, so now the higher priests work for him. And it's just this corruption and evil that he commits. And so a lot of Bible scholars believe that this 4th beast is of Antiochus IV. Other Bible scholars believe that this is not something that happened in the past, but something that's going to happen in the future, that this will be actually some form of the Antichrist and that predispensationalist theology, and that he will come and offer a sacrifice, that someday the Dome of the Rock will no longer be there, there'll be another temple that'll be there, and that he'll offer a sacrifice there, and then that's going to signal in the second coming of Jesus. If you're familiar with the predispensational theology, you know that framework. So this begs the question, which one's right? And I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think the right question to ask is this: what does Jesus teach us about this passage? What is Jesus' vision of this passage? Because, let you in on a little secret, this is one of Jesus' favorite passages. How do I know? Because he uses it all the time. But I want to take you to a story, Matthew 26, I'm sorry. Jesus is in front of the Jerusalem council. It is these spiritual leaders, and everybody is there. Check out what's happened in verse 26. It says, the chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they can put him to death. But they did not find any. Though many false witnesses came forward, finally 2 came forward and said, and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is the testimony that these men bring against you? But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. And I love Jesus' answer. He says, you have said so. Jesus replied, but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus is quoting right here out of Daniel chapter 7. So what does Jesus think about this? He's in front of these spiritual authorities and powers, this kingdom of priests. And so it's the Sanhedrin, it's all the council, it's all of these Bible scholars, it's all of the leaders of this church. And they're looking for a reason to kill Jesus. They're looking for a way to be justified in their murder of him. And so they're pressing him, asking him questions about things that he said and stuff like that. And Jesus says of them, here and now, I'm the Son of Man image in Daniel 7. And he says, and after you complete what you're about to do, you think it is my destruction, but it is actually my exaltation. You think in overcoming me, you will defeat me, but it's actually a part of what God is doing. And immediately after that, they lose it. Because Jesus is telling Bible scholars who they are in this story. Now, there's a lot of nuance that needs to happen here, so let's talk about that a little bit. If you're a huge Star Wars fan, right, and I come dressed up to you, and I'm in a whole black suit, and I got the black helmet on, and I say, I am your father, right? I say that to you. If you're a Star Wars fan, we're already tracking, right? And if you're a really good Star Wars fan, you start giving back dialogue, right? Whatever. If we're at some sort of Comic-Con convention or something like that, we're all tracking on the same page when I do something like that. Jesus is in a room of Bible scholars. These dudes memorized the whole Old Testament. They're versed in the scriptures, so they fully understand what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is saying very clearly, you all have become the beast. You have all become the beast, the super beast, as in Daniel 7. And God is going to destroy you, and I am the Son of Man. What's really funny is a lot of us think Jesus' last name is Christ, right? That he was born to Mary Christ and Joseph Christ, right? Christ is a term, it means the Messiah. But notice in the scriptures, this is how a lot of people refer to Jesus, and he accepts that title, but he never uses this title of himself. You know what Jesus uses of himself over and over and over again? The Son of Man, the Son of Man, the Son of Man, drawing right here to Daniel chapter 7, revealing himself to who he is. He is this human one who has divine power and authority, who is a God-human who will ascend to the throne and be responsible for overthrowing the beasts. This is the imagery that Jesus loves to use for himself. And what he's saying to these leaders is this: you all have been overcome by the beast. And this is God's judgment on you. He says, and you think that because you have power, nasty large teeth, big claws, this authority, horns in the scripture are this imagery for authority and for power. All throughout the Old Testament you see these kings represented as horns, these symbols of power. And Jesus is like, but you have no power here. And that infuriates them, and they go through with his execution. Because of that moment. That is the pivotal moment that shifts the trajectory of the whole story. So, I want you to think back into the whole library of the scriptures for a moment. Let's dial all the way back to Genesis, where the beast overcomes Adam and Eve. After they are overcome by the beast, God shows up, right? And he asks Adam, where are you? Where are you? When they come. And he asks Adam basically, what's happened? And he says, it's the woman you gave me, right? And she's like, what? She's all, it's the beast, it's the serpent that's here, right? And God issues judgment on all of them. But you know what he tells this beast, this serpent? That there is one coming who will be born of the seed of the woman, who will be a human, who will crush his head, and you will strike his heel. So all throughout the scriptures, we're waiting for this human one with the power to overcome the beast. We get excited about Abraham. Maybe this is the guy. Maybe he will overcome the beast. God's going to start a brand new family with him. Abraham finds himself in Egypt, and the Pharaoh asks, is this your wife? Nope, I don't know her. She's my sister. She's cool though, whatever. You guys want to hang out or something? Turns his wife over, right? God speaks to Pharaoh like, bro, that's his wife. Don't do anything. And Pharaoh's like, why did you lie? He's like, I thought you were going to kill me, whatever. So we realize Abraham's not the guy. Later in the story, Moses comes. And Moses is delivered in a miraculous way. He's saved from this mass genocide, and he's brought up in the house of Pharaoh, and you're thinking, this is it. He's our guy. But in a moment, trying to bring his own authority and bring his own power, he murders an Egyptian to show them, I'm the guy who's supposed to deliver you. And the Israelites reject him, and he's off, and he's exiled. And there's a pattern in Moses' life where he continues to allow his anger to overcome him. And he strikes the rock instead of speaking to it, etc., etc. And we realize Moses isn't the one. Later in the story, King David shows up on the scene. And he's a handsome worship leader. he's our guy. And not only is he like artistic and writes poetry and is handsome, but he's also manly. He's rugged. He's defeated lions and bears with his own hands. Ladies, this is the man you dream of, you know? He's the guy. He's sensitive and rugged, spiritual and strong. Like he's this perfect symmetry of a human being. And he sleeps with another man's wife and has him killed in the battlefield to cover up his sin. And you realize he's not the one. So through the scriptures, you're waiting for this human one to come and to overcome the beast. And suddenly in Bethlehem, to a poor immigrant woman and immigrant man is born one named Jesus, who comes in human likeness and in his life faithfully resists the beasts. And in his death and resurrection is ascended into heaven and is now seated on the throne. He is the human one we looked for. He is the Son of Man. Now there's one other category of people I want to talk about here, and it's these holy people. It seems that they suddenly just get thrown into the story. There's like God, there's these beasts, and then there's this Son of Man. And suddenly, after all like the fighting and all that stuff's happened and they're destroyed, these holy people all of a sudden there, and they get to inherit all this good stuff. It's like they're destroyed, and all of a sudden these holy people show up and they're like, oh, and you get to have everything. You get to have the authority, the kingdom, the power, it's all yours. You're like, I want to be one of those people. Guess what? You are. These holy people are the ones who follow the Son of Man. These holy people are the family of God. Now I want you to think about a story right now in your mind. You can pick from anywhere, but think about where we've been. Hint, hint. I want you to think about a story about a group of people who are underneath the oppression, the rule of an evil empire. And threat of death, this beastly empire is always on the verge of overcoming them. And every single time there's this moment of almost overcoming, God intervenes, pushes back the beast. And then these regular, ordinary people get exalted to authority and power. Who could this be? Maybe Daniel? Who started off as just an exile and has become one of the most powerful people in Babylon? How about his friends, who are just these exile immigrants who become some of the most powerful in Babylon? And there's time and story again where they're faced with threats of death, and after they've been threatened with death and God intervenes, they're then exalted to a place of authority and power. This brings us all to right here, right now. This is what this vision means. But what does this mean for you and for me? I told you two things I wanted you to know today. One, God is with you in the waiting. And two, God is working through you in the waiting. We, like Daniel, are stuck in between the already and the not yet. Jesus has already come. He's already removed the authority and the power of the demonic powers that be and the evil one who works against us. But he has not yet returned. His kingdom is not yet established here. So we live in this moment. We live in this tension of waiting, where we live in the reality of the kingdom that's coming, what we currently exist in the kingdom that is. And we've been having conversations around how we be faithful. And here I believe is God's word for us today. Don't lose heart in the waiting, because it's easy if we're honest. It's easy. The first couple years you're going strong, you're doing good, but time and time again, the world keeps coming, troubles keep coming, trials keep coming, and it's like, when, Lord? When are you going to come? The first thing I wanted you to know is that God is with you. There wasn't a moment that Daniel and his friends endured in Babylon that God was not right there with them. You feel this ache of being in exile, and God aches with you. You think God's heart doesn't shatter when he sees the injustice in the world? You think God is not grieved at what we have done to his good world? You think God is not crushed when he sees his people in agony? He is with you in your hurting, in your suffering. I want you to think about Jesus as he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, feeling the weight of waiting, the agony of being human, what it feels like to be in exile. It is there where he bears the weight of our humanness, and he overcomes through the resurrection. God is with you in the garden. He's with you in this moment of crushing. He's with you in this moment of pressure. He's with you while you wait. And the second thing is God is working through you. He's working in the world. He's doing things. For Daniel, it seemed like a bunch of these psychopathic kings keep coming into power, right? With huge egos, large checkbooks, and do a whole lot of damage. And he's like, God, these are the people that we have in power? Can we get at least someone a little bit more moderate, a little less temperamental, you know? He's frustrated at what's happening. But God lets him peek behind the scenes and says, all of these kingdoms, all of these kings will be overthrown, and I will be seated on my throne. I will be exalted. I will be king over all. God reveals to Daniel that he's working, just as he always has been working. Here and now, in our cultural moment, God is doing something beautiful. God is doing something unique. And I believe, especially in our community here, God is stirring something up by way of his Spirit. Even as we were just even entering in this morning in worship, it seemed like God was already confirming this word for us today. I'll let you in a little secret. Jake and I are not that coordinated. You know? I don't get with him and say, bro, this is the song, do this song. But God stirs that by his Spirit because this is what he's speaking to his church. And the word for us is to remember there's a kingdom that's coming. And though these beastly kingdoms are scary, or are cause for concern, can be frightening at times, are not all powerful. There is one to whom they answer to. I want to ask the worship team to come up as we close this out. And I want to remind you of this. As a follower of Jesus, as a creative minority, we have a hopeful promise. Briefly, a word on hope. We use the word hope in exchange with the other word like a wish. I hope things go well. I hope you get the job. I hope nothing bad happens. And it's kind of this frivolous, like, I wish good things. I wish that doesn't take place. But the biblical mindset of hope is not a wish. It is a strong confidence in God's future. For the biblical authors, hope is rooted in the person of God. It's rooted in the character of God. It's based on who he's been, will let us know how he will be. Our hope is not put in just some future event. Our hope is put in a person, and his name is Jesus. And we have a promise from him where he says, I'm coming again to establish my kingdom. And while you wait, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. We are commissioned in the waiting to be here in exile and to bring his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven until he comes. And I want us to close out of this passage in Isaiah 65, which is the promise of this kingdom. This is the kingdom your eyes long to see, your feet long to walk in, and your heart longs to live in. Isaiah says this, see, I will create a new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come into mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people, and the sound of weeping and of crying will be heard no more. Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years. The one who dies at 100 will be thought of as a mere child, and the one who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of the trees, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will enjoy the work of their hands. They will not labor in vain, nor will their children be doomed to misfortune. For they will be a people blessed by the Lord, and they and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. And while they are still speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion will eat straw like the ox, and the dust will be the serpent's food. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord. Before they call, I will answer, and while they are still speaking, I will hear. I believe right now is a moment for our church to call out to him, this King who will bring this kingdom. I believe right now is a moment for us to intercede for our city, that the kingdom of God would come here, and that people would be set free. There are some of you sitting in the room right now who just feel the ache. God is near. He hears your cries. He's with you, and he's working. Lord, we come before you now, reminded again that you sit on the